That Christmas dinner. My mother lifted her wineglass and smiled like she had already buried me beside Grandma Eleanor. "We finally sold Grandma's house," she said. "You were never in the will anyway." My sister Claire laughed, tapping her new bracelet against the china. Good. Maria would have just wasted it. 11 faces turned, waiting for me to cry, beg, or leave. I did none of that. I took one slow sip of wine, felt the folder in my purse, and said, "Cool, hope you enjoy the cash," since I'm the one who bought it. Then I showed them what Grandma had hidden. To understand why that sentence cracked something inside me, you have to understand what Grandma Eleanor's house was to me. It wasn't just old wood and 10 acres outside a small Midwestern town. It was the smell of coffee burning on the stove at 6 in the morning. It was flour on my wrists, tomato vines scratching my arms, and Grandma's laugh coming from the back porch when I added a column wrong and blamed the calculator. I grew up in a house where love always came with a measuring cup. My mother, Lydia, measured everything. How straight I stood, how quiet I was, how much money I made, how I looked beside my younger sister, Claire. Who could walk into a room late, empty-handed, and still be called sunshine? Claire got the soft voice. I got the sigh. At family dinners, Mom would touch Claire's hair and say, "Some girls just know how to make life beautiful." Then she would look at my plain sweater, my tired eyes, the ink on my fingers from client receipts, and ask if bookkeeping was still keeping me busy. Not proud, not impressed. Busy. Grandma Eleanor was different. She never asked why I wasn't more like Claire. She asked if I had eaten. She asked if my car was making that clicking sound again. She kept a chipped blue mug just for me. On the second shelf. Handle turned out. By the time I was 22, I had a tiny bookkeeping office above a hardware store. The stairs smelled like sawdust and old pennies. My first winter there. The heat failed twice, and I worked in fingerless gloves, balancing farm ledgers under a humming desk lamp. Mom called it a cute little phase. Grandma mailed me a check with no note, then called and said, "Don't argue. Pay rent." That was Eleanor, sharp as a tack, warm when it mattered, stubborn as January ground. She taught me to read bills at her kitchen table, one finger tapping the paper. "Numbers don't lie." "Maria," she would say. "People do." I thought she meant dishonest feed suppliers, late payments, bad estimates. I didn't know she was warning me about my own family. For 8 years. When Grandma's knees got bad and her hands started shaking, I was the one who drove out there. I picked up prescriptions. I sorted payments. I argued with insurance. I changed light bulbs, carried groceries, and sat beside her when the wind rattled the windows so hard she pretended not to be scared. Mom visited on birthdays if someone reminded her. Claire came for pictures in the garden. Then, one gray February morning, my phone rang while I was reconciling a stack of farm bills. Grandma had taken a bad turn overnight, and somehow, before I even grabbed my coat, I knew this was the call that would split my life in two. I didn't know about the key yet, or the letter, or the way my mother's voice would change when she realized Grandma had chosen me long before anyone started counting money. But somehow, that old house already knew. Grandma Eleanor died 3 days after that call. She went in her sleep, the way people say they hope someone goes. But there was nothing gentle about what came after. The farmhouse filled with casseroles, perfume, black coats, and whispers. I planned the funeral because nobody else knew which hymn she liked or which neighbor had to be seated away from which cousin. Mom wore black and accepted sympathy like she was hosting a charity luncheon. Claire stood near the fireplace, taking pictures of the old mirror, the quilt rack, the walnut hutch. "That clock has to be worth something," she murmured. I was standing close enough to hear her. She didn't lower her voice. The day after the burial. I found Mom in Grandma's kitchen opening drawers, not crying, not looking for a keepsake, looking for labels, receipts, anything with a number attached. "We'll have to be practical," she said, without turning around. That was the first time I felt it, not grief, something colder. A month later, Mom called a family meeting at her house. She said it was about Grandma's estate. I expected a lawyer's office. Stiff chairs, maybe a receptionist with a clipboard. Instead, I walked into Mom's dining room and found coffee cake, paper plates, and Victor Hale sitting at the table with a folder. Victor was a distant relative on Mom's side. He handled local paperwork, notarizations, small legal filings. He smelled like aftershave and nerves. Mom sat beside him, perfectly still. Claire came in late, wearing sunglasses on her head and carrying a shopping bag. Victor cleared his throat and read from the document. According to him, Grandma Eleanor had left the farmhouse, the land, and most of the estate to my mother, to Lydia, the devoted daughter. The words landed so wrong I almost laughed. Grandma could be loving, but she was not sentimental, and she would never have called Mom devoted, not after years of missed appointments, forgotten birthdays. And I'm just too busy this week phone calls. Then Victor kept reading. My name never came up, not once. I looked at the signature page. Grandma's name sat there in smooth. Careful ink, too smooth, too careful. The date was only weeks before she died. When her hands shook so badly I had to button her sweater. Can I see the probate filing? I asked. Mom's face changed so fast it scared me. Maria, she said softly, which was how she sounded right before she cut. Your grandmother is barely gone. And you're already making this about money. Claire made a small disgusted sound. I felt the room tilt. My father stared at his coffee. Victor shuffled the papers. Nobody looked surprised. That was the worst part. They weren't confused. They were waiting to see if I would be quiet. Mom reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a child. You were never in the will anyway, she said. Don't embarrass yourself. I drove home with my hands locked around the steering wheel. And halfway there, I remembered the little key Grandma had pressed into my palm before she died. I went back to the farmhouse the next morning before sunrise. The road was silver with frost, and my tires cracked through the frozen gravel. For a second, I sat in the driveway, staring at the porch swing. It moved in the wind, slow and lonely, like Grandma was still waiting for me. Inside, the house was colder than I expected. Her slippers were still by the chair. Her reading glasses sat on the side table. A half-used bottle of vanilla stood near the stove, and the kitchen smelled like dust, lavender, and old sugar. I stood there with that tiny key in my palm. Grandma had pressed it into my hand the last time I saw her awake. When the time comes, she had whispered, you'll know where to look. I hadn't understood. Now I did. The tin recipe box was on the shelf above the stove, tucked behind a cracked flour jar. I took it down with both hands. My fingers shook so badly I missed the keyhole twice. When it opened, I didn't find recipes. I found a small envelope marked with my name, a brass bank key, and a letter in Grandma Eleanor's handwriting. I read the letter standing at her kitchen counter. By the second paragraph, I was crying so hard the words blurred. She knew. She knew Mom had been circling the farmhouse for years. She knew Claire saw the place as money. She knew I would be made to feel greedy for asking questions. And then came the line that changed everything. Don't shout. Maria, let the paper speak. I folded the letter against my chest and stood there until morning light hit the old table. Then I called the estate lawyer Grandma had named. Her office was above a bank downtown, quiet and warm, with shelves full of thick files and coffee that smelled too strong. She recognized Grandma's name before I finished. 2 days later, we opened the safe deposit box together. Grandma had added me as an authorized person years before, so there was no trick, no sneaking, no broken rule, just my signature, her planning, and one brass key. Inside was the original will, the real one, signed properly, witnessed properly, dated years before Mom's version appeared. It left the farmhouse and the land to me. The lawyer looked at Victor's paperwork, then at the real will, and her mouth tightened. This can be challenged, she said, but it won't be instant. That was the problem. The estate was already moving. Mom wanted the house sold fast, before anyone slowed her down. The sale would happen at a public auction. If I waited for court, the farmhouse could be gone. So I did the only thing I could do without breaking the law. I prepared to buy it. I formed a proper legal entity with my lawyer's help. I checked every loan number twice. I used my savings, my credit, and every ounce of courage Grandma had given me. The winning bid was about $240,000. Mom thought a stranger had bought Grandma's house. Claire called me the next week to brag about her new SUV. I let her talk, because by then, Christmas was coming, and when they came home to celebrate what they had stolen, I would be waiting with 3 pieces of paper. Christmas dinner at my mother's house looked beautiful from the doorway, which almost made it worse. Pine garland curled along the banister. Candles burned in glass holders. The good china was out, the kind Mom used when she wanted people to remember she had taste. Roast turkey, cinnamon, buttered rolls, and expensive perfume mixed together until the room smelled like comfort trying too hard. Mom hugged me with one arm and kept the other hand around her wine glass. "Maria," she said, bright enough for everyone to hear, "I'm so glad you came." Translation: "Look how gracious I am." She seated me on her right, close enough to display, close enough to control. Claire sat across from me, her new bracelet flashing every time she lifted her glass. The SUV keys were on the table beside her purse, silver and smug. Victor was near the hallway. He kept checking his phone, the front door, then his water glass. My father sat at the far end, shoulders folded inward, cutting turkey into crumbs. I had the leather folder in my purse. For an hour. I was polite. I passed potatoes. I asked Daniel about work. I smiled at my aunt's story about a Walmart cake. I laughed in the right places. Inside, I was listening to the paper breathe. Then Mom tapped her glass with a fork. The room quieted. It always did for her. "I just want to say something," she began, rising from her chair. "This has been such a hard year, losing Mother." But I believed she would want us to move forward. Her eyes slid to me. There it was. "We finally sold Grandma's house," she said. "You were never in the will anyway." The words did not surprise me. They still hurt. Claire leaned back and laughed, quick and sharp. "Good," she said. "She'd just waste it," Daniel whispered. "Claire." But she only shrugged. 11 faces turned toward me, some embarrassed, some curious, some hungry for the kind of family scene people pretend they hate while leaning closer. Mom's mouth curved into that satisfied smirk. She expected tears. She expected me to explain myself until my voice broke. Instead, I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate, slowly, carefully, the way Grandma Eleanor did when she was finished with foolishness. Then I picked up my wine glass. The stem was cold against my fingers. The room watched my hand lift. I took one slow sip, set the glass down, and looked straight at my mother. "Cool," I said. "Hope you enjoy the cash." Since I'm the one who bought it. For a second. Nobody understood. Then Victor's chair scraped the floor. Mom blinked. "What did you just say?" I reached into my purse and took out the leather folder. "This is the deed," I said, laying the first document in the center of the table. The farmhouse was sold at public auction for about $240,000. The buyer was a legal entity I control. Claire's bracelet stopped moving. Mom stared at the page like the words were rearranging themselves to insult her. "No," she said. "That's not possible." I placed the second paper beside it. "This is Grandma Eleanor's real will, signed years ago, witnessed properly. It leaves the farmhouse and the land to me." My father closed his eyes. I took out the last page, and my voice softened despite myself. "And this is her letter. I did not read all of it. I did not have to. I only touched the line with my finger. Don't shout, Maria. Let the paper speak." Mom's face drained of color. Claire looked from the will to her keys, and I watched the math reach her. The SUV, the payments, the money she had already spent. Victor stood up. "I should go," he muttered. The lawyer's card was clipped to the folder. I turned it toward him. "You can?" I said. "But she files after Christmas." Mom finally found her voice, and it came out cracked. "You planned this." I looked at the candles, the food, the whole table built over a lie. "No," I said. "Grandma did. No one moved." The table went silent. The first business day after Christmas. I sat in the lawyer's office while rain tapped against the windows and signed my name until my wrist hurt. Not one signature felt like revenge. It felt like pulling a nail out of wood, slow, necessary, painful even after it was done. My lawyer filed to reopen Grandma Eleanor's estate. She submitted the real will, the deed, the bank records, the payments, the bills, and the timeline Victor had helped Lydia bury under polite family language. The court did not move like thunder. It moved like winter, quiet, heavy, certain. Victor broke first. People like him always do. He had spent weeks pretending he had only witnessed a harmless family update. Then his commission came under review, and suddenly his memory improved. He admitted the signing had not happened the way the paperwork claimed. He admitted Lydia had pushed him. He admitted money had changed hands. My mother called me once. I let it go to voicemail. Her message started angry, turned wounded, then ended the way it always did. I'm your mother, Maria. As if that erased everything. It did not. The estate money had to be accounted for. The cash Lydia received from the sale was no longer a prize. It became a problem with interest attached. She had already used most of it to cover old debts and personal bills she had hidden from my father for years. Claire had to sell the SUV. I heard she cried at the dealership. I did not cheer. I did not feel sorry either. There is a place between cruelty and forgiveness. That is where I lived for a while. The farmhouse stayed mine because I had bought it honestly, at public auction, with clean money and clean papers. The court dealt with the estate funds. I dealt with the house. My father moved into the spare room before New Year's. He came by my office one afternoon and stood in the doorway with his hat in both hands. I should have asked questions, he said. Yes, I told him, you should have. He waited for comfort. I did not give it, but I did not close the door forever. When you're ready to tell the whole truth, I said, you know where to find me. Spring came soft that year. I drove out to the farmhouse with tomato plants on the passenger seat. The porch swing still creaked. The kitchen still smelled faintly of vanilla and dust. I opened the windows, let the old air leave, and planted Grandma's garden with my bare hands. For the first time in months, the house finally felt less like evidence. It felt like home again. I keep Grandma Eleanor's letter in the kitchen drawer now, beside the recipe cards stained with cinnamon and tomato seed packets. Some mornings, when coffee fills the house and the porch swing complains in the wind, I read the line again. Don't shout. Maria, let the paper speak. That was the lesson. Real love does not wait for someone to get weak before reaching for their money. Real family does not erase the person who stayed, then smile over turkey like the lie is dessert. I lost the family I thought I had, but I kept the truth. I kept the house, and I kept the part of Grandma that mattered most. If you have ever had to protect someone you love from the people who should have protected them first, tell me in the comments, and hit subscribe, because sometimes justice knocks softly before it opens the door.